I think it's very important that we recognize what a fiscal crisis we face in the United States. Today, America's public debt stands at over $12.9 trillion. That's $12.9 trillion, regrettably, that will go on our children and grandchildren's credit card. We have just last year raised that debt by $1.4 trillion. It'll be $1.6 trillion added this year. And this mountain of debt is going on the backs of our children and grandchildren. We'll have to pay the interest on it, but they're the ones that are going to bear the real burden. Taxpayers are already bailing out Wall Street with failed banks, $700 billion, GM and Chrysler, $80 billion, the toxic twins, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, more than $1.2 trillion. We have tried unsuccessfully to deal with Fannie and Freddie in this financial regulation bill, and when you look at the cause of the financial crisis that's hit, it's the subprime market, the bad home loans that were enabled by Fannie and Freddie being willing to purchase them. In my humble estimation, we should not pass a financial regulation bill designed to prevent a reoccurrence of the crisis which we've just gone through without dealing with Fannie and Freddie. But when you look at the budget deficit, taxpayers are on the hook for $1 trillion in a failed stimulus package which only created jobs in the governments. It was a government expansion, not a measure to create jobs in the private sector. The President and majorities in Congress have also recently created a new taxpayer-funded entitlement for health insurance. Many of us in December were pointing out the fact that this bill would add to the debt. It would drive up costs of private health insurance. It would limit the ability of seniors on Medicare to get their services by cutting the amount of money going into Medicare, and it would lead to higher taxes. Funny thing, the new actuary in the CMS has just come out and repeated those same four things. The health care bill is not only going to drive up private insurance costs, you're not going to be able to keep the same plan you had. It will continue to squeeze down the services that Medicare recipients can receive, and it will add to the deficit and thus the debt. But how much more debt and how many more unfunded liabilities can we take on before destroying the economy? What's happening in Greece, regrettably, could happen here. I strongly support the Gregg Amendment, which will ensure that taxpayer funds are not used to bail out states. We've talked about too big to fail in terms of financial institutions. We ought to be talking about it in terms of government. We said that we passed adopted an amendment saying we shouldn't use taxpayer money to bail out Greece. Well, we shouldn't be in the position where we would be called upon to bail out states which have been unable to get their spending under control and get their spending in line with their revenues. I know a little bit about tight state budgets. When I was governor of Missouri, we had to make tough decisions. I came back into office as governor in 1981 with a huge deficit in the middle of the year, and we couldn't spend money, we couldn't borrow money to cover that deficit. So we made major drastic cuts in spending, and it was not pleasant. I was picketed by people who had to be laid off from the state government. But we readjusted and managed to provide services that our state needed and put the state back on a sound financial footing. And states all across the country are taking tough steps. There are areas where they have agreed to go without services to get their budget in balance. Most states don't have the ability to run deficits. Those that do have the ability to should not be operating on the false assumption that the federal taxpayers and our children and grandchildren will come back in and be asked to take the irresponsible and unacceptable task of putting a burden on residents of the states who've made the tough decisions and cut spending to pay for the mounting debt of other states who have spent their way into the red for years. In fact, a bailout of states would create a disincentive, an ongoing disincentive for state leaders to make tough decisions and implement necessary reforms to get their budgets in balance and future liabilities under control. The Missourians I hear from are very angry. They're angry every day at spending money on things that are too big to fail. They're angry that the government continues to use their hard-earned dollars to help companies like AIG and potentially to help a country like Greece, which failed, instead of paying down our debt and cutting the runaway spending. This bailout mentality must end. I thought that was one message that we were going to carry with this legislation. I hope this legislation actually does, although I'm concerned that there are provisions that could enable the federal government to continue bailing out and taking over more businesses. The federal government must not continue to be an enabler of those companies or those countries or states who continue to spend beyond their means. It's time for the leadership at the state as well at the national level to make the decisions necessary to put all of us on a sound financial footing. I thank Senator Gregg for his strong leadership on budget issues and for offering this amendment, and I urge my colleagues to support it.
Mr. President.